What's Happening once felt timeless, a show about youth, friendship, and endless laughter. Time proved otherwise. Age, addiction, illness, and death caught up with nearly everyone. This is What's Happening, 1976, cast then and now, and why the cast is tragically old, or no longer here at all. Ernest Thomas as Roger Rerun Thomas. Ernest Thomas was born on March 26, 1950, in Gary, Indiana, USA. He was just 26 years old when What's Happening premiered in 1976, becoming instantly recognizable as Roger Rerun Thomas, the loud, lovable heartbeat of the show whose suspenders, grin, and dance moves defined an era. As What's Happening soared, Rerun eclipsed the man playing him, locking Ernest Thomas into a single image the industry refused to release. When the original series ended, he returned for the sequel What's Happening Now, but the momentum never truly carried over. Casting doors quietly closed, and the laughter that once followed him faded into long stretches of unemployment and financial instability. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Thomas battled addiction while watching younger audiences remember Rerun as a joke frozen in time, not a living man aging behind the scenes. Recovery did not come quickly or easily. Over time, he began to reclaim control, speaking openly about survival, faith, and the cost of being trapped inside a character the world refused to let die. As of 2026, Ernest Thomas is 76 years old. He lives quietly, making occasional public appearances, sharing his story. Haywood Nelson as Dwayne Nelson. Haywood Nelson, born on March 25, 1960 in New York City, USA, was only 16 years old when What's Happening debuted in 1976. He portrayed Dwayne Nelson, the calm, intelligent counterbalance to Rerun's chaos, a character defined by quiet maturity well beyond his years. While the series was still airing, Nelson's natural restraint set him apart, but it also worked against him. After What's Happening ended, Nelson returned briefly in What's Happening Now, but the revival failed to restore the cultural impact of the original. Outside the sitcom, he appeared in projects like A Different World and made guest appearances on television, yet none offered the stability or recognition his early success seemed to promise. As the industry shifted in the 1980s, opportunities thinned without warning or explanation. Nelson stepped away from acting altogether, a decision shaped less by choice than by exhaustion, tired of waiting for roles that never arrived. As of 2026, Haywood Nelson is 66 years old. He lives a private life outside the entertainment industry. Danielle Spencer as D. Thomas. Danielle Spencer was born on June 24, 1965, in Trenton, New Jersey, USA. She was only 11 years old when What's Happening premiered in 1976, stepping into the role of D. Thomas, the sharp, confident teenage girl. In 1977, a devastating car accident killed her stepfather, Tim Pelt, and left Spencer herself in a coma. When she awoke, survival came with a lifelong price: permanent spinal damage, chronic pain, and physical limitations that would follow her into adulthood. When What's Happening was canceled in 1979, the loss of the show felt minor compared to the physical and emotional battles she was already fighting. Seeking purpose beyond television, Spencer enrolled in medical studies at the University of California in 1983, inspired by the memory of her stepfather and the fragility of life she had experienced firsthand. After 2 years, she returned briefly to acting in What's Happening Now in 1985, but her heart had already shifted elsewhere. Soon after, her health crisis deepened. Spencer was diagnosed with breast cancer in September 2014. In 2018, Spencer underwent emergency surgery to relieve bleeding in her brain. Spencer died from stomach cancer at Chippenham Hospital in Richmond, Virginia, on August 11, 2025, at the age of 60. Shirley Hemphill as Shirley Wilson. Born on July 1, 1947, Shirley Hemphill came from Asheville, North Carolina, USA. She was 29 years old when What's Happening premiered in 1976, stealing scenes as Shirley Wilson, the sharp-tongued waitress whose blunt honesty. Before television fame, Hemphill honed her voice as a stand-up comedian. What's Happening finally gave her national visibility, but success came with limits. After the series ended, she returned in What's Happening Now, yet Hollywood continued to confine her to variations of the same comedic archetype. Film roles followed, most notably in The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh and Big Money Hustlers, but they never restored the stability or momentum the sitcom once promised. As offers slowed, financial strain and isolation crept in, pushing her further from the spotlight that had once felt permanent. Behind the laughter, Hemphill's health quietly deteriorated. Years of battling diabetes placed relentless stress on her body, eventually leading to severe kidney failure. On December 10, 1999, Shirley Hemphill was found dead in her home in West Covina, California. She was 52 years old. Mabel King as Mabel "Mama" Thomas. Mabel King, born on December 25, 1932, in Charleston, South Carolina, USA. She was 43 years old when What's Happening premiered in 1976, commanding the screen as Mabel "Mama" Thomas, the fierce, no-nonsense mother whose booming voice and unshakable authority anchored the show's family dynamic. Long before television fame, King built her career as a singer and stage performer, later transitioning into film and television with roles in The Wiz and The Jerk, where her presence carried both warmth and intimidation. On What's Happening, she became the embodiment of tough love. But behind the scenes, her health was already beginning a slow, irreversible collapse. Diabetes quietly tightened its grip, turning everyday life into a constant battle long before the public noticed anything was wrong. By the mid-1980s, the disease had become devastating. Complications led to multiple amputations, each one further stripping away her independence. A severe stroke in 1990 forced her into long-term care at the Motion Picture and Television Hospital in Woodland Hills, California, abruptly ending her acting career. Mabel King died on November 9, 1999, at the age of 66. Fred Berry as Freddie "Rerun" Stubbs. Born on March 19, 1951, Fred Berry came from St. Louis, Missouri, USA. He was 25 years old when What's Happening premiered in 1976, exploding onto television as Freddie "Rerun" Stubbs, the suspenders-wearing, breakdancing force of joy. After the original series ended, he returned in 1985 for What's Happening Now, hoping to reclaim momentum. Instead, conflict erupted behind the scenes. Berry was fired before the first season ended after a salary dispute, having demanded pay he believed matched his cultural value, a decision that effectively severed his last strong connection to the franchise that made him famous. Film appearances followed, including roles in Any Which Way You Can and The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh, but none restored the stability or visibility he once held. Away from the cameras, Berry battled drug and alcohol addiction for years, cycling between brief recoveries and devastating relapses as opportunities disappeared. Health problems mounted and a stroke left him physically weakened, forcing him into recovery far from the public eye. On October 21, 2003, Fred Berry was found dead at his home in Los Angeles while recovering from that stroke. He was 52 years old. The cause of death was listed as natural causes. Helen Martin as Millie, Mrs. Lloyd. Born on July 23, 1909, Helen Martin came from St. Louis, Missouri, USA. She was already in her late 60s when What's Happening aired in the late 1970s, appearing as Millie, later Mrs. Lloyd, a sharp-tongued older woman whose brief scenes carried the weight of lived experience rather than sitcom exaggeration. Martin's path to recognition was long and punishing. She spent decades working in theater and small screen roles with little stability. Even after What's Happening, her appearances remained scattered and modest, including roles in Good Times and later 227, where she finally found wider recognition as Pearl Shea. Age did not soften her determination, but it did narrow her world. As the years passed, Martin continued acting selectively, relying on discipline rather than industry support. Health issues slowly followed, limiting travel and work. Helen Martin died on March 25, 2000, in Monterey, California, at the age of 90. The cause of death was a heart attack. Teddy Wilson as Al Dunbar/Marty. Teddy Wilson was born on December 10, 1943, in New York City, New York, USA. He was in his early 30s when What's Happening aired in the late 1970s, appearing as Al Dunbar and later Marty, supporting roles that reflected the everyday realism the series quietly depended on. Wilson moved steadily between guest appearances and short arcs, never granted the security of a defining role. After What's Happening, he continued working across television, with appearances on shows such as Good Times, Sanford and Son, and The Jeffersons, often cast as ordinary men navigating strained circumstances. As the 1980s progressed, opportunities thinned. The industry shifted, and Wilson, like many character actors of his generation, found himself quietly pushed aside without scandal or explanation. Financial and emotional pressure mounted as acting work became increasingly sporadic, turning survival into a private struggle rather than a public collapse. On July 21, 1991, Teddy Wilson died of a stroke in Los Angeles, California. He was 47 years old. Thalmus Rasulala as Bill Thomas. Thalmus Rasulala, born on November 15, 1939 in Miami, Florida, USA. He was in his mid-30s when What's Happening aired in the late 1970s, portraying Bill Thomas, a stern, working-class father figure whose authority and restraint reflected the pressures of real life beyond teenage comedy. Before and alongside What's Happening, he appeared in socially charged films such as Cool Breeze and Blackula, often cast as hardened men shaped by violence, race, and survival. These roles gave him visibility but also narrowed his path. In 1970s realism, opportunities grew scarcer, leaving him fighting for relevance in an industry that quickly moved on. Years of demanding work, financial uncertainty, and limited career mobility placed constant pressure on his health. While he continued acting into the 1980s with appearances in films like Escape from Alcatraz and television roles that relied on his commanding presence, the momentum never stabilized. On October 9, 1991, Thalmus Rasulala died of a heart attack in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was 51 years old. Debbie Morgan as Diane Harris. Debbie Morgan was born on September 20, 1956, in Dunn, North Carolina, USA. She was just 21 years old when What's Happening featured her as Diane Harris, a recurring character whose warmth and intelligence added emotional balance to the series' teenage world. After What's Happening, she fought for stability in an industry that offered few sustained opportunities to young black actresses beyond sitcom appearances. Her breakthrough came years later in daytime television, where All My Children finally gave her narrative weight and longevity. The relentless pace of soap opera production, combined with typecasting and personal pressure, tested her resilience. Morgan endured multiple failed marriages, emotional upheaval, and periods of reinvention that required stepping away, reassessing, and starting again. Yet she persisted, gradually reshaping her career with more complex roles, including her acclaimed performance in Eve's Bayou, which revealed depth and vulnerability far removed from her earlier television image. Each reinvention came at a cost, but also with a clearer sense of control over her craft and identity. As of 2026, Debbie Morgan is 69 years old. She remains active in film and television, respected for longevity rather than flash. Nearly 50 years have passed since What's Happening first brought laughter into American living rooms. Time, illness, addiction, and loss have rewritten nearly every life behind that joy. Which story stayed with you the longest? Leave a comment and follow along as we continue uncovering the forgotten truths behind television's most beloved shows.